How did ancient children learn without schools? Imagine finding a footprint frozen in mud thousands of years ago. Not the footprint of a king, not the footprint of a warrior, the footprint of a child. Somewhere thousands of years ago, that child ran, played, explored, and learned about the world around them. Yet there was something missing from their life that modern children take for granted. They never went to school. No classrooms, no textbooks, no homework, no exams. And yet they still learned everything they needed to survive. How? The answer reveals something surprising about human nature and may even change the way we think about learning today. For more than 95% of human history, schools did not exist. There were no teachers standing at the front of a room and no desks lined up in neat rows. Yet generation after generation, children learned how to find food, build shelter, identify danger, care for others, and become skilled members of their communities. But how did that learning actually happen? If there were no classrooms, no teachers, and no textbooks, where did children get their education? The answer begins with one of the most powerful learning tools ever developed by our species: observation. Anthropologists studying traditional societies have repeatedly noticed something surprising. Adults rarely stop what they are doing to deliver formal lessons. Instead, children watch, and they watch carefully. A child might spend hours observing a basket being woven. Another might follow hunters as they prepare their tools before dawn. Others might watch older siblings care for younger children. Learning happened through attention, through participation, through curiosity. Ancient children were surrounded by experts every day: the expert hunter, the skilled gatherer, the storyteller, the healer, the craftsperson. And unlike a modern classroom, these experts were not teaching abstract ideas. They were demonstrating skills that mattered for survival. A child could see the direct results of knowledge. The right plant provided food. The wrong plant could cause illness. A well-made tool worked. A poorly made tool failed. The world provided immediate feedback. Human beings are remarkably good at learning through imitation. In fact, some researchers believe that our ability to copy others is one of the reasons humans became so successful as a species. Unlike many animals, humans do not need to rediscover everything for themselves. Knowledge can be passed from one generation to the next. A child could learn in a few years what had taken previous generations centuries to discover. And observation was not passive. Children were not simply sitting and watching. They were constantly participating. They gathered food. They carried water. They cared for younger children. They accompanied adults on daily tasks. They became part of community life from an early age. For many ancient societies, childhood was not separated from the adult world in the way it often is today. Children learned because they were included. And perhaps that inclusion helped them develop confidence and competence much earlier than we might expect. But observation alone was not enough. Watching someone build a tool is different from building one yourself. Watching a hunter track an animal is different from tracking one yourself. Children needed a safe way to practice, a way to make mistakes without serious consequences. And this is where one of the most fascinating parts of ancient childhood appears: play. Today, play is often seen as entertainment, something children do when they are not learning. But what if play was actually one of humanity's oldest educational systems? What if games were lessons in disguise? Archaeologists have discovered miniature tools in different parts of the world. Tiny bows, small spear throwers, miniature digging sticks, child-sized versions of adult equipment. At first glance, they appeared to be toys, but many researchers believe they served another purpose: training, practice, preparation. A child using a miniature bow could develop coordination. A game involving tracking footprints could teach observation and patience. A playful competition could build problem-solving skills. The lessons did not feel like lessons, and that may have been exactly why they worked so well. Modern researchers often describe play as nature's classroom. Ancient children may have understood this instinctively, because through play they were preparing for the responsibilities that awaited them as adults. And in the next part of our story, we discover something even more powerful than observation and play. A tool so effective that humans used it for thousands of years to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Stories around the fire. There was another advantage to learning through participation. Children learned at different speeds. Some were naturally curious about plants. Others were fascinated by animals. Some preferred making tools. Others enjoyed listening.
Others enjoyed listening to stories. And stories may have been the most powerful educational tool of all. Long before books existed, knowledge had to survive inside human memory. There were no libraries, no written manuals, no notebooks, no internet. If important knowledge was forgotten, it could disappear forever. Human communities solved this problem through storytelling. Around campfires, children listened to stories about animals, ancestors, dangerous places, successful hunts, and lessons learned through experience. These stories entertained, but they also educated. A story could teach where to find water during a drought. A story could explain which animals were dangerous. A story could preserve the memory of an important event for generations. In many ways, stories became humanity's first information storage system. And unlike a written document, a story could travel. It could move from one camp to another, from one generation to the next, from grandparents to grandchildren. Knowledge remained alive because people carried it inside their minds. Anthropologists studying oral cultures have repeatedly discovered something remarkable. People can remember astonishing amounts of information when it is embedded inside stories. This is one reason myths, legends, and folk tales appear throughout human history. They are not simply entertainment, they are memory technologies. The campfire became more than a source of warmth. It became a classroom, a theater, a library, and perhaps even humanity's first university. As darkness fell and work ended, families gathered together. Children listened. Questions were asked. Experiences were shared. Lessons were passed on. Some stories explained the landscape. Others explained the stars. Some taught moral lessons. Others taught practical survival skills. The important thing is that knowledge was being transferred, not through textbooks, not through examinations, but through conversation and shared experience. And because stories are emotional, they are easier to remember. A warning wrapped inside a story is often remembered far longer than a simple instruction. Imagine being told, "Don't go near that river." You might forget. But imagine hearing a story about a hunter who ignored warnings and never returned. That story stays with you. The lesson becomes unforgettable. Modern psychologists have discovered something similar. Human beings are naturally drawn to stories. Stories capture attention. Stories create emotion. Stories help us organize information. In many ways, the human brain seems designed for storytelling. This may explain why storytelling became such a universal human behavior.
Nearly every culture on Earth developed traditions of oral storytelling. Separated by oceans and thousands of years, people arrived at the same solution: tell stories, remember knowledge, pass it on. But stories did something else as well. They helped create identity. A child listening around the fire was not simply learning facts. They were learning who they were. They were learning where their people came from. They were learning what their community valued. They were learning what it meant to belong. Many stories explained origins. Where did our people come from? Why do we live here? Who were our ancestors? What mistakes should we avoid? What virtues should we admire? Stories answered these questions, and in doing so, they connected individuals to something larger than themselves. This was especially important in small communities. People depended on one another for survival. Shared stories helped create trust. Shared stories helped create cooperation. Shared stories helped transform groups of individuals into communities. In a sense, stories became social glue. They connected the past to the present. They connected elders to children. They connected experience to memory. And perhaps most importantly, they connected one generation to the next. Without stories, knowledge could disappear. Without stories, lessons could be lost. Without stories, communities might struggle to maintain their identity. And perhaps most importantly, how to belong. Stories helped preserve knowledge, but they also helped children understand where they fit within their communities. Ancient children were not simply preparing for life, they were already living it. From an early age, they participated in the daily activities of their families and communities. They watched adults solve problems, share resources, care for children, and work together toward common goals. In doing so, they learned something just as important as hunting, gathering, or tool-making. They learned how to live with other people. Human beings are remarkable not only because of our intelligence, but because of our ability to cooperate. Throughout history, survival often depended on teamwork. A successful hunt required coordination. Building shelter required cooperation. Raising children required support from family and community members. Ancient children learned responsibility by helping, empathy by caring for others, and trust by contributing to the group. They learned that they were part of something larger than themselves, a family, a community, a shared story. And this brings us back to the question we began with. How did ancient children learn without schools? The answer is surprisingly simple. They learned because learning was woven into everyday life. They learned by watching. They learned by listening. They learned through stories. They learned through play. They learned through participation. And they learned through responsibility. This does not mean ancient childhood was perfect. Life could be difficult. Resources could be scarce. Dangers were real. Yet, despite those challenges, ancient communities developed remarkably effective ways of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. For thousands of years, observation, storytelling, participation, and shared experience helped children learn the skills they needed to survive and thrive. Modern education has transformed the world, but many of the ways humans learn best remain surprisingly familiar. Children are still curious. They still learn through experience. They still learn through stories from the people around them. When we look at the lives of ancient children, we are not simply looking into the distant past. We are looking at the foundations of our own humanity. Their curiosity became our curiosity. Their lessons became our traditions. Their communities became the building blocks of civilization. Archaeologists occasionally discover traces of children in places where no names survive. A footprint pressed into ancient mud, a tiny handprint on a cave wall, a miniature tool left behind thousands of years ago. These small traces remind us that the past was not only shaped by kings, warriors, and rulers, it was also shaped by children. Although thousands of years separate us from them, their curiosity was not so different from our own. In many ways, their story is also our story. Learning was never separate from life. Learning was life. It happened around campfires, along rivers, on hunting trails, through stories, through games, through conversations, through responsibilities, and through the countless moments that connected one generation to the next. For most of human history, the world itself was the classroom. Nature was the textbook. Experience was the teacher. Community was the support system, and curiosity was the force that drove it all forward. Maybe that is why the story of ancient childhood still matters, because it reminds us that learning is not only about information, it is also about participation, connection, discovery, and belonging. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What surprised you most about how ancient children learned? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into humanity's past, subscribe to Ash and Origins for more stories exploring the archaeology, anthropology, history, and human experiences that shaped who we are today. Until next time, keep asking questions, because every answer about the past reveals something about ourselves.